And then he does something right after that that he never does. Again, to the point of a Trump rally, the relationship between the rally goers and Trump is very, very transactional. He feeds off of them; they feed off of him. It's a really emotional dynamic, and because of that, he never looks away from them. Now, he may turn his whole body to face different parts of the stage, but he never turns his head away. Chart goes down, he turns his head away, pop, 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 pop. And gunshots went right over us, and we saw the president go down.
Hi, Culminators. Today we are going to talk with Salena Zito. She is a happening person. She's been a happening person for a while, but it happens that we've happened upon her during a happening week, and she's going to explain why. This is being recorded the week of February. Well, today's the 27th. I don't know what the week is. I don't even know what the day is. She's got a gig with the Washington Post, which she's going to explain to us. But that's been a happening situation as well. Long time with the Washington Examiner since 2016. Author of The Great Revolt. Many people who knew Salena as a working journalist considered her early on to be sort of the Trump movement whisperer among the people that they didn't consider to be overly bizarre or weird or from other planets, because she was really one of them, or was she? She's interviewed every president and vice president in the 21st century. And in the 2016 election cycle, she interviewed 22 presidential candidates, both Democrats and Republicans. But 2016, let's not kid ourselves, that was a million years ago.
Yeah.
A lot has changed. Salena, great to have you on the show. How you doing?
Great to have. Great to be had. I really appreciate spending some time and to chat with me. If people don't know this, I live in Western Pennsylvania. My family is from Pittsburgh. I moved outside of the city, but not that far, 25 miles.
Well, I
And
was just in Center County, which is not west, it's center, obviously. But I mean, that's about as far west as I usually get in Pennsylvania. Just was it this week? It was Monday, right? Did I speak? Yes, it was Monday. I've lost track of at the Lincoln dinner for the GOP there.
oh, nice.
Yeah, it was
That's
nice.
nice. I live 4 counties away from that. I live in Westmoreland
They
County.
have a lot of counties in Pennsylvania. From a New Jersey
67.
point of view, Pennsylvania is a super big state. I know they come bigger, but
Yeah.
among as the original colonies go, Pennsylvania is right up there.
We were the big guys back in the day.
Yeah.
Then came Texas and California and sort of threw us off.
Now,
But
and all the square ones in the middle.
yeah,
Now you were kind of taking a break from X. I mean, I hadn't seen you
I
around
did.
for a
I
while.
left. I left for several years,
Yeah.
and I didn't just stop tweeting. I deleted my account.
Yeah, you
I
really
wanted
did.
I wanted nothing to do with it. I was harassed horrendously, um, threatened, both publicly and privately, and it just was not for me. It's not,
And
like
was
I'm
that
a workhorse.
because of just being a conservative journalist, or
So,
did you kill puppies or something? What was the reason?
actually, it really didn't come from Democrats. It came from the Never Trump crowd. And they were brutal and accused me of things that were unfounded. And I don't want to really relive that, other than to say I left for a while. It doesn't mean I stopped working. So if people want to, this is what I do. I'm a daily reporter for the Washington Examiner. I write almost daily. I do, and I travel all over the country. I do not fly. I do not take the interstates. I only use back roads. So if I was going to Center County where you were, I would have taken US 22 as opposed to the turnpike. There's a reason that I do that, and it's
Yeah.
not because of all the trucks on the turnpike.
Although
Because
a reasonable person could do it just because of the trucks, and that would answer the question. But you've got an even more interesting answer, obviously.
Well, that's where the stories are. If you're on the turnpike or on the interstate, you may as well be flying.
So
You
you're
only
an old-fashioned shoe leather reporter who actually talks to human beings on the surface of the earth and sometimes is actually not sitting in front of a laptop. Is that what you're trying to tell us here?
Yeah, I'm rarely in front of a laptop unless I have to file my story. And that's sort of how I do it. That's how I understand what's going on. I started understanding what I have called the conservative populist coalition. Oddly, back in 2006, when the Republicans were about to lose the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and they were like, "Well, why?" Well, it was easy. People didn't understand how mad conservatives were at the establishment. They did not understand they were mad enough to vote for Democrats that Rahm Emanuel, who was in charge of the DCCC at the time, had cultivated to run. These Democrats, think of Patrick Murphy, Chris Carney, Jason Altmaier. These Democrats, Kathy Delcamper. These Democrats were pro-life, they were pro-gun, and they were about being fiscally responsible. And he made it. And when I watched these conservatives decide to vote for them, I thought, there's something might be happening here. I think the parties are changing. And it's not that Republicans like Democrats now. It's just they're really mad at the Republicans for not listening to them, especially on spending and the war. And so in that moment, I thought that something different was happening. And so that is when I really started just personally, not writing about it, but also from an observational point of view. When 2008 presidential campaign came out, well, of course Barack Obama is going to win. He ran on an aspirational campaign. It was not divisive. It was, for the most part. John McCain was represented, for the most part, of the kinds of Republicans that Republicans felt had betrayed them. So they are going to punish Republicans. Now, 2012 comes along, 2010 comes along, it was a no-brainer. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. She has made these conservative Democrats that were elected just a couple years earlier vote for things like Obamacare and cash for clunkers and do bailouts. It was inevitable that they were going to lose these races in the next cycle, and they did, hugely in 2010, and usually again in 2014. But in 2012, people tend to forget that Barack Obama made the decision to shed the New Deal Democrats from the Democratic coalition. New Deal Democrats had been with the party since FDR.
This is a really important phrase. This term is really useful because it describe the coalition. Who you mean by New Deal Democrats? Because we've forgotten about them. They're still living they're still mostly living in the New Deal. They're
Yeah.
still voting. Explain.
Yeah, so these Democrats, which I grew up around, which my grandparents were, which my parents were working class, often members of unions, also Catholic, also believed in fiscal responsibility, right? And Obama decided he was going to be, and he was the guy that could do this for the Democrats, right? He's going to change the coalition, and it's going to be the ascendant coalition. They're going to be minorities, Blacks and Hispanics, young people, and college educated women and men. That was the new party. And he was popular enough that he could lose votes and still win. He's the only modern president to have less votes in his second run at the presidency than his first. In Pennsylvania, he won over 10 percentage points in my state in 2008. By 2012, he won just about 5%. That's half. That's half of the state. So where did those voters go? That was my curiosity. Where did those voters go? Well, they still personally liked Barack Obama, but they didn't like his policies. Mitt Romney looked like the guy who was going to take a box to their desk and escort them out of the building. So he didn't earn their vote. So he just stayed home. But they needed to be tapped into. And the Democrats were willing to shed them. And the Republicans didn't quite know what to do with them.
Well, hold on.
But along comes
You say they
good.
needed to be tapped into, but they were abandoned. I don't
They were
understand.
abandoned. Democrats didn't want them. Republicans didn't quite understand them because they're not free traders, right? And then Donald Trump comes along, okay? And I remember distinctly him coming down that escalator like most Americans do. And my profession reported mostly about that speech being about Mexicans and rapists, right? Which, by the way, go back and read that speech. It was largely taken out of context, as things often are. That speech to me and to every Republican and Democrat that I knew in the Appalachian Midwest, which is Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, that sounded to them just like Bill Clinton in October of 1992 when he announced. He talked about the dignity of work. He talked about, I'm seeing you. I see what's happening to your community.
Right.
And
The Bill
so,
Clinton, the original Bill Clinton, the one I voted for, really was talking about a centrist approach that would, the Reagan Revolution was over and the old, the government is finished and we're going to work together towards a little bit more the kind of gentle George Bush kind of
yeah,
approach. And Trump also basically is a non-ideological candidate. Now, Clinton betrayed. He ran on that. He moved to the left almost immediately. Not on everything, but on some key symbolic things. I remember his first act don't was to change to don't ask, don't tell.
yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting choice. But please, back to your narrative. I don't mean to take your.
Oh, sure. So I saw that, and I saw that appeal that it would happen to have to working class, right? But you need a coalition to win. Although you always need the working class to win an election, you also need a substantial working class to win the right states. So I go to Iowa. If nobody knows anything, if no one's ever been to Iowa and knows how a caucus works, well, first of all, Republican caucuses are always evangelical Christians or conservative Catholics, right? It's like pretty religious electorate. And so they usually pick four people, and usually they have it on a piece of paper or written on their hand. Who are you going to vote for? So I'm talking to these guys. I think it was in Davenport, and I'm like, so who do you like? A first choice, Ben Carson. I'm like, why? He's just like us. He shares our values. Second person, Bobby Jindal. Remember, he was a conservative Catholic. And well, why do you like him? He shares our values. He's just like us. Third person, Ted Cruz. Why do you like him? Well, we don't really like him, but he shares our values. And then the last person was Donald Trump. And I'm like, why? And he's because like in my brain I'm thinking he is a three-time married Playboy bunny dating Howard Stern regular, right? Like what does he have in common with these voters, these very religious voters who have a very very personal relationship with their faith? Oh, that's easy. He's just mean enough to go up against Hillary Clinton and stand up for religious liberty. And it was in that moment, I remember writing this down, saying, if he wins evangelicals and he has the working class and he can pick off enough suburban voters, he's going to win this election. And I remember when I wrote the book, The Great Revolt, we called them King Cyrus Christians in that chapter, those voters. So, because King Cyrus famously took the Jews into protection, even though he had no sort of personal connection between the Jewish people and this Persian king,
Right.
but he was badass enough to get them out of harm's way. So it was kind of the same relationship. So anyway, so that's sort of how I've fallen this coalition. And I understood in my reporting in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and because remember, Ohio voted for Barack Obama twice in 2016, so in 2008 and 2012.
When's the last time Ohio failed to be the bellwether?
2016. Oh no. 2020.
2020, Trump on Ohio?
Yeah. Um, and so, with all the reporting that I did in all those Great Lakes, Midwest states, I understood he was going to win basically by July. I took a lot of grief for that. People are like, "Oh, you just like him," or you're a whatever they wanted to call me. I'm like, no, this is what my reporting is showing. And so that's how I came to be. In the middle of the election in 2016, September actually, to be exact, my newspaper offered buyouts, and I had to take it, and I was without a job when at the end in the middle of September in 2016, and it was at that moment that the Trump people called me and said, "Hey, you have an interview with him tomorrow." This is when he's candidate Trump. And I said, "Oh, that's awesome." And this is the same day I lost my job or left my job. That's more accurate to say that way. And and I walked down like, I have an interview with Trump and I don't have a job. So I called a bunch of places, but all of them said no except for the Atlantic. And I did the interview. I know, right?
But
I
that was
did the
that was
interview.
before Jeffrey Goldberg took over, right?
Um, I don't. I think he was there.
It was
Maybe I don't know.
I don't know if I think it was during the first Trump administration that he became editor in chief.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. I didn't. I did
The
the
point is they
piece.
hadn't jumped the shark yet. You
No,
think I don't think so.
no, no. I don't think so. It was during that interview that I said to Trump, voters take you seriously, but they don't take everything you say literally. Where my profession takes everything you say literally, and they don't take you very seriously. And that quote kind of like elites really loved it. But it was just an observation, right? And so for the next few weeks, I worked for like four different publications, writing four different stories every day, like barely making ends meet. But I wanted to finish the election cycle. So on election night in 2016, no, election eve, the night before, I interviewed Mike Pence on the tarmac in Pittsburgh. And I went home, wrote the story, and I cried because I didn't have a job after the next day. I had one more piece to do that was for the New York Post on election day. And I really, really felt like every Trump voter that I interviewed because I was old, 57, my profession was dying, and nobody really wanted me anymore, right? But I went to work the next day. I had identified 10 counties in Pennsylvania that Trump only needed to get 2,000 more votes than Mitt Romney did in 2016, and he would win. And I followed my counties that night. I mean, my story was done at like 9. I knew he won. Because if he won Pennsylvania, that meant he won Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida, because Pennsylvania is a
And it was
little.
around 9. I was in Philadelphia, and it was around 9 that we knew that he was going to
Yeah.
win Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And
And
were you at home?
No, it was at the Republican, they were having like a party
Yeah, where?
in Pittsburgh.
Are you in Pittsburgh? Okay, so I was in Philadelphia.
We were at opposite ends of the state.
Right.
And and the next day I didn't have any more jobs. At the time I lived next door to a bakery. And if anybody follows me on social media, I know you do, everyone knows I bake. I mean, there's always food in my Twitter feed, mostly food and grandchildren. And so there's a bakery next door. I'm like, I'm a good cook. I'm a good baker. They'll hire me. So, so I was walking to it and like, because I didn't think I had a chance to have another job in writing news. And CNN called me and said, we want you to be on the show today. I'm like, of course, being Italian Catholic, I'm like, what did I do wrong? And they're like, no, 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 you're the only reporter that called it. And oh, by the way, we want to hire you as a contributor. And then within the next day, I got an offer from the Examiner, which I graciously took. I was so excited. But by the way, the bakery did not hire me. I'm still now, in fairness, it's a French bakery. I don't really get French cooking, but I was naive enough to think I can do anything. I couldn't do French cooking. So here I
Wow.
am, 8 years later. I wrote The Great Revolt with Brad Todd. It's really sort of a Bible into looking at and understanding the coalition, because I just went back out there and really described it to people. And now this year, in case your listeners don't know this, I was in Butler on July 13th with President Trump. In fact, within feet of President Trump that day. And I've written a book about it. So I hope that people, it's called Butler.
Is it out
And
already?
it's on pre-order. I would love people to pre-order it, because apparently that's what you do, is get people to pre-order your book. The reason you do that is so that bookstores will then supply it. It's not really about a big ego. It's about making sure small bookstores have copies of it. But so I was in Butler. Did you find it?
Almost. Here we go. Here it is from the publisher. Can't do better than that.
Yeah. So you can pre-order it on Amazon, you guys. I hope you do. It's I didn't realize how good it was until I reread it. I was set to interview the president that day and Butler. Now, as a reporter, you know that things will probably change 20 different times based than what you planned on happening that day. The plan was I was going to interview him for 5 minutes right before the rally. My daughter came with me, as she often does. She's a photojournalist. In fact, she took the photo of the cover of the book. So she was with me, and we dragged my son-in-law to carry all like the lighting equipment, mainly because it was like 100 and some degrees that day, and we didn't want to be sweaty. We wanted to make him sweaty. Didn't work. We were still sweating. It was really dreadfully hot day. But I'm at the event, and I get a text saying, "Hey, Salena, there's been a change of plans from the Trump campaign." I'm at the press riser at this point. I'm like, "Oh no, here it comes. It's going to be canceled." And there's like a little bit of a gap in time. Then they're like, we're going to do it after the rally. I'm like, okay, still only 5 minutes. Okay, whatever. Well, let's do an interview. Now, about an hour before the president gets there, I get another text from the campaign saying, so, hey, Salena, how would you feel about like flying with the president from Butler to Bedminster, and we'll do the interview. He'll do the interview there. He'd love to talk to you about Pennsylvania. I've interviewed President Trump at that point. I think it was 9 or 10 times. So I've interviewed him a lot. And so I was like, okay. And I said, well, I have my daughter and son-in-law with me. And they're like, bring them along, do the photos, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't have that on my bingo card, but here we go. So it's just before Trump is about to go on stage that the campaign person grabs me and says, it's go time. I'm like, wait, I thought we were, what? So I get all my stuff and we're at the press riser, and there's sort of like this little passageway that you can get through for staffers that's in between the crowds. You can't even really see it. It's really a strange thing. And we go flying through there. We go backstage. The president is back there. There's a line of police officers, public servants, right, and firemen, paramedics. It's called the click line, and he takes photos with people back there. And they put me in the back of put us in the back of the line, and I said to the young man, his name was Michelle, I'm like, where are we doing the interview? And he looked at me, he goes, I don't know. So he goes, let me go ask. So he goes around the curtain, he comes back and like very sheepishly, he goes, we're not doing the interview now. And again, I'm thinking, oh, we're not doing an interview. He goes, he just wanted to say hi to you.
Oh,
We're still going to Bedminster. I'm like, okay. So I go back there, and President Trump and I have this thing where he always says, oh my God, look at her, everybody. She has like the best hair in journalism. To which I always get so embarrassed. There's a great part in the book where he chases me around with hairspray. I hope people buy the book just for that part because it's really funny. He says hi. He asks about my 4 grandchildren. He remembers their name. And he goes, okay, I'll see you on the plane. And at that point, you can tell by the music, he's ready to go out on the stage. So Michelle, the press advance guy said, you know what, you guys, I can't get you back to the riser. Stay in the buffer. Okay. The buffer is an area, it's a well that separates the rally goers from the president's stage, mostly for photojournalists and security. So we're there, Michael and Shannon, my daughter and son-in-law, they're there with the photos, they're taking photos. That's why you see that great photo on the cover of the book, because Shannon had stayed back for a minute to capture that. Because it was just, if you've never been to a Trump rally, there's really something interesting. There's a dynamic that happens between him and the crowd, and she really captures it well on the cover, because you can see him looking at them and you can see them looking at him, and it's not something you always see. So he comes out, Lee Greenwood, we're like, right in front of him. We follow him to the podium. We're right underneath him at the podium, and then we go off to his side, because we want to just be ready to go. That's where they want us to go. So Shannon is taking photos, and then 2 things happen really quickly. I'll never forget this. A chart comes down, and I'm like, what? Is he like Ross Perot? What is going on here? Right? I can't understand why there is this chart. And then he does something right after that he never does. Again, to the point of a Trump rally, the relationship between the rally goers and Trump is very, very transactional. He feeds off of them, they feed off of him. It's a really emotional dynamic, and because of that, he never looks away from them. Now, he may turn his whole body to face different parts of the stage, but he never turns his head away. Chart goes down, he turns his head away, pop, 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 pop. And gunshots went right over us, and we saw the president go down. There's some pretty iconic photos of me on the ground. You can see I have cowboy boots on. That's why, like, my family thought I was dead, because I'm on the ground and the the Michelle is on top of me, trying to protect me. God bless him. I will always, always think of him as a hero at that moment. The book describes that day in detail, obviously a lot more detail I'm doing right now. But what's really powerful in that detail is he calls me the next morning, like oh dark 30, and it's like, Selena, are you okay? Is Shannon and Michael okay?
Wow. What a
Oh my
match.
God, you were shot. I was not shot.
And you're also, and also, I mean, it's nice that I'm a person and you're a person, but you are the president of the United States. We need,
Yeah,
like, everything needs to sort of
yeah.
settle in. So it's amazing that you got that. So you got it. Book is coming. When's the book coming out?
Well, it comes out July 8th, but I hope people will pre-order it. It's
I
a
will encourage them to do so.
Oh, I love you. Thank you. The book, I honestly, I wrote the book. It was not my idea to do the book, but people thought it needed to be written because it was a moment in history, right? But I also write very deeply about the election and from the ground in Pennsylvania and stories that people just did not see. If you turned on MSNBC or CNN or you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, you didn't see those stories and you thought something very different might happen.
That,
That's not what I saw. And that's not what I
what's
experienced.
can you give me an example of what's like what you're getting at when you say that?
I'll give one example. Do you remember the Madison Square Garden? Um,
The
uh,
rally.
yeah. And it was, everyone believed it was over for President Trump with Hispanic voters because of that joke, the insult comedian,
Right.
and something to do with garbage. And
For,
so
for,
his next event was in a deeply Hispanic Puerto Rican town in Lily High Valley. And I was like, okay. So I drove out there. And everyone on all the big papers, like, there's going to be these massive protests. Nobody's going to vote for him. Well, I was like, I don't think that's true. I have been covering the Hispanic movement towards Trump for a very long time. There's going to be a reaction. This is what I think the reaction is going to be. Do you not think Puerto Ricans can take a joke? And do you think that would change our vote when nobody in this current administration has been listening to us for 4 years? And I was right.
45%.
Yeah.
40 all-time record for for Republican.
Yeah. And what they don't understand, so I'm Italian, in case you can't tell by my name. And the Hispanic, whether it's Puerto Rican or El Salvadoran, whatever it is, the Mexican, what people don't understand is, and they very much remind me of my family. I'm a first generation American. I watched my immigrant family come here. I watched how they worked hard for the American dream and were initially Democrats and laborers. They were Teamsters, and I watched them move over to the Republican Party. A lot of it had to do with on faith, on abortion, about freedom of religion, but also just keeping your ducks in the order in terms of your budget, not overspending, staying within your budget, and self-protection and self-preservation, gun ownership, all those things, and a lot of immigrant families, no matter what the nationality is, they're small business owners, right? They're plumbers, they're HVAC, they own a small store, well, whatever the case may be, a beauty salon, a barber shop, right? And the regulations that a small business has to deal with under, in particular, under Democrat administrations, really just crushes them. It makes it really, really hard for them to be successful. So that's why that's why they have been moving over to the Republican Party. And it's pretty much complete after this cycle. And
Really, you think
so
so?
that,
You think the Republicans will have a majority of Latino or Hispanic votes after wait after this
yes,
election?
yes. Absolutely.
I'll tell you something else also. Puerto Ricans are Americans.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Puerto Rico has been part of the United States for a very long time, even before we were born.
Yep.
And they can, like you said, they can take a joke.
Yes.
They don't feel vulnerable the way recent immigrants, Colombians, Dominicans might. They're part of our national fabric. They just happen to speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you 100%. I want to, in the time that we have left, move us into the crazy week that we've had in the White House, with the White House uh, briefing room. And you mentioned that you managed to get yourself not almost shot, but at least you somehow in the middle of that situation as well.
Right. Well, so I don't go to White House briefings because I live in the middle of Pennsylvania. However,
Wait,
if for
how could you
some,
possibly report on national politics and not live in Washington? You might actually have a perspective of a regular American. You might
well, that's
actually talk to
exactly why I
human
live out
beings.
here. That's exactly where I live out here.
Exactly.
Also, my family's been in Pennsylvania since 1632. I'm pretty rooted. Not the Italian side, the Scots German side. The Italians, no. But so regular Americans, Democrats and Republicans and independents, often watch the questions coming in the White House briefing room and they wonder, I don't know, where did that come from? That doesn't even important to like what's going on in the country, or they never see anything that is reflective questions of the way their worldview. It's always been a very Washington worldview. Now we're in the center of Washington. There should be policy questions in there, but
Right.
maybe policy questions of how does this impact regular Americans, as opposed to how does this impact my center of power and wealth. Though for the longest time in my profession, people that work in the press, and I should say this does not make them bad people. However,
This doesn't make them not bad. Salena saying this also doesn't make them not bad people, but
but it may,
she's just not weighing in on that.
well, what I think it just does is the questions are coming from people that live in the five wealthiest counties in the country, okay, who
Right.
all went to the same very similar schools, have very similar education, go to the same events. They don't know anybody like me. They don't know anybody but like my neighbors. So therefore, they're wildly disconnected. Look, I've written about this. Our cultural curators. So what do I mean by that? These are the people that control what we see in culture. So not just the big media, but also corporations, institutions, academia, Hollywood, at the NFL, right? They all come from the same 10 most wealthiest and powerful counties in the country. They make decisions on what we eat and what we see on television and what questions are asked in the press room coming from that place. And it's a very transient place where most Americans are very rooted. 8 out of 10 people live within, I think it's 100 miles of where they grew up. So people outside of the perimeter of their county, of those counties, have very different life experiences, and they don't understand why the questions are the way they are. Which brings me back to, it was important that there's a variety of different kinds of voices and news organizations in the press room that is more reflective of the country as a whole and not reflective of DC. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And part of the reason it is besides the fact that the changes have included a dislodging of certain privileged organizations. part of the reason they had, I think, a narrative that they could actually hang their hats on here was we're the Associated Press, we're the equity brand, we're history, we're what everyone over the age of 30 grew up thinking of as the actual real working journalists. And we're being replaced by, or at least made less privileged than, uh, bloggers and social media influencers and podcasters. That's impossible. How can that be? Those are amateur, those are hobbies,
Yeah.
and we're professionals. And what's your response to that?
My experience as a journalist comes from a city newspaper, right? That's where I got my beginnings. And I would say at least 20%, possibly more, because I didn't go around and ask everyone, didn't even have a college education, but they were damn smart. They knew how to go out there and get the story, write it up succinctly, and knew the questions to ask because they understood who they were covering. But they were going to be held accountable because they lived in your community, right? They taught your kids how to drive a car, right? They were the driver instructors at the school part time, or they were your ushers at your church, right? So they were really invested in the community, and there was no sense of privilege when you were a news reporter in a local city paper. And I think that humbling needs to happen with all journalists. If there's a way to put it, we need to come down a step or two. I don't think I ever came up a step or two. I'm still the same person I always was. But, I think we need to be, as journalists, be more responsible and be more reflective of the people that we cover. To my point about cultural curators in the news, a lot of times you see news reporters covering things that have to do with faith, that have never stepped foot in a church or a synagogue or a temple, that have never sat in a pew. You see reporters that report on the life movement, on abortion, and don't know anyone that is pro-life. Now, that doesn't mean they have to, but gosh, I think people would be less treated as zoo specimens when you write about them, or a gun. I mean, every time there's a story about a gun, I'm like, have you ever loaded one? Do you know how they work? Do you know how awesome it is to go target shooting? Right? Like, do you really not know how awesome it is to
You
do
know,
that?
they're really members of a completely different class. And as you say, they're college educated, usually from the better or more expensive schools. They identify with each other and with the bureaucrats, permanent bureaucrats and
Right.
technocrats. And it takes a great deal of courage, I think, to do what Donald Trump is doing now, which is to reshuffle the deck in terms of who's going to get access and who's going to get into the briefing room, because the old order simply those are no longer the people, the working press, the regular person who may or may not. First of all, everyone has a college degree now because they give them out. They don't give them out for free. You have to borrow $250,000, but everyone gets one. They're meaningless. And so many of these so-called reporters are really entertainers, or the irony is they're really just bloggers on more expensive platforms than than people who, I'm using the term blogger, I'm showing my age, but we had the debate in the 90s, bloggers versus, is blogging journalism? And, we always used to say, Glenn Reynolds taught me
Oh,
this,
my favorite.
journalism is something you do, not something you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've done a lot of it. You've done a great deal of it. And I think we could talk for hours about the experiences you've had. But guess what? Our hour is nearly done. So what I'm going to do is ask people to read what I'm sure is going to be a riveting tale about the near assassination. It's going to be available in July, but you can pre-order now. And by the way, you didn't want to say this. But pre-ordering does. It doesn't just tell the mom and pop stores to buy it. It tells Barnes and Noble and the punks who want to hide the conservative books. People want to buy this book. It's not being thrust on you, and you have to, it's a problem that you have to tolerate. If you want to have sales in your store, this is a book that's going to sell.
Yeah, you're right. It's look, it when I look back at the months of September, well, August, September, and October, leading up into November, I was traveling everywhere. I put tens of thousands of miles on my car just in my home state alone. And I'm writing every day and I'm interviewing the president and I'm interviewing people and I'm trying to, give people the best information as possible. But I'm also writing a book, right? 62,000 words in 3 months. And there's part of me that doesn't almost remember writing it until I get it back. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? And I'm reading it and I start crying. I'm like, this is really good. And I don't even remember writing it.
So that is sort of an amazing journalist, when you are asked to speak at some journalism seminar or class or lecture, you can draw on that and say, that's a variety of journalism I had never thought was going to be part of my life.
Yeah.
Real eyewitness,
To history.
historical moment journalism that is um so acute of an experience that you can practically spit out the book and without even thinking about it because it was just so real and so there and so
Yeah,
true.
it is true. People are going to learn something really profound in the first chapter. And Donald Trump is not the only president to be shot at in Butler.
Buy the book. Elena,
Thank you.
thank you so much for chatting. You were fascinating. I hope we get a chance to meet in person one of these days.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But until then, maybe we'll talk again this way. Thank you very much for culminating along with me.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me.
okay, catch you later.